Okay, guys. So welcome to this webinar on the 12 Entrepreneurial Styles. My name is Aaron Machano. I'm very, very excited to share this webinar with you. It's been something that's been a long time coming because, as I mentioned, there's been about, I don't know, over 400 entrepreneurs, startups, upstarts that I've coached over the years, and always been asking myself the big question, what information or what tools can I use that could help people increase their probability of success by at least 80%. And obviously, one of the reoccurring things that I found was that, one of the most clear indicators is that every one of us is quite different and unique in our own way. But the most important thing is that, I'd come up with a couple of strategies that might have worked for one person, completely didn't work for the other. So I started looking at, things like profiling an individual, questioning of people as to what values they had, what drove them, and obviously to try and find a way of creating a business that fits. So this webinar has come as a response to that. And I thought it'd be really, really cool just to kind of update not just clients, but people out there on some of these realizations that I've had, and hopefully it can guide you guys in your business. So without further ado, let's kick in. So first and foremost, I wanted to touch on about this aspect of being politically correct. I've done a lot of talks now, keynote speaking events, and I'm finding more and more that, a lot of people who tend to embrace my style of speaking also tend to be as of a particular disposition, because I found in a lot of my engagements in the past, I would always have an opinion about something, share it with people, and even though it had the best of intentions, in most cases, some people may or may not take it. So similarly, when you get into a startup, a lot of times I encourage people to start thinking of themselves as a heretic, a fearless heretic. And all that a heretic does is that they usually go against status quo and do things to try and innovate or bring about change. But in a lot of cases, you just can't keep up with pleasing everybody, because the minute you do something different, like get into a business, majority of the population aren't in business. So most likely they'll see you as, they'll just find it challenging to kind of embrace your ideas. So you might fall into this area like I have in a lot of cases, where you come across a little bit politically incorrect because you're not really in the market to, share things that might sound nice to people. You're in the market to kind of offer some truths that may be very true for you, but not for everybody. So my style is exactly the same. So I just like to put that out there, that obviously I'm not here to tell people what to do, but at the same time, I've just come across a lot of experiences that make a huge difference to business and startup success, that I would just say things as I see them based on my personal experience. But at the end of the day, it's not the only truth. So just want to put that out there. So it really boils down to one thing. And I think the word for me that I love the most is intentions. And every time I look at people's behaviors around me, or people that are maybe doing things slightly different, rather than questioning what they're saying to me, I always ask myself, what is the intention around here? And what is the intention of what they're trying to say or do? And that's what I probably try and connect with as much as possible. So a couple of intentions I have for this webinar is obviously kind of, revolves around these 6 areas. One of them for me is about this aspect of being brutally honest. Now, I used to just say I write honesty, and I think honesty is very important, and all of us want to be honest. But the reality is that in a lot of cases, we want honesty, but it's also very, very difficult sometimes to hear the honesty. But if you can kind of benchmark yourself to try and give content or information that you think is as honest as possible, then I think you're off to a good start. The second is obviously fun. I love what I do. I love working with people that love what they do. And one of the most important things for me, I think, is, just get into this mindset, if you can, as soon as possible, that business is fun and business is simple. And I think if you think about that and try and approach that in everything you do, you find that things just flow for you a lot easier. And obviously the time goes by fast, so you don't get stuck in this trap of counting your hours. Third is showing initiative. I think this is one of the most important aspects of being in business is, it's not necessarily a taught skill in traditional schools, I think. But in business, absolutely, by far, one of the most successful things that you can do, or most powerful things you can do for yourself, is just get into the habit of trying new things and not really psychoanalyzing yourself or trying to make it perfect, but just initiate ideas, initiate adding more value to your customers, whether they pay you or not, initiate doing more research, initiate even meeting new friends, and then initiate new ways of thinking. It's very, very important. And the fourth is obviously value add. It's very, very important that you try and come up with information, content, or products or services, whatever you're in, but just always ask yourself the question: is this of value? And if it is, then I think you're really off to some good foundations for your business. The fifth is self-give, and this one basically I share this in every single talk that I have. That if you're gonna get in business, and we talk about it actually in this talk, some people come across a little bit more altruistic than others. There's nothing wrong with that, but the most important thing is you are in business to sustain yourself. You're also in business to make a difference and help people, I hope. But you have to get to a point where if you're going to work really, really hard on your product, service, or idea, it makes sense for you to kind of come up with a bit of confidence and self-worth to basically ask the market to pay you for what you're worth. Because if you don't do that, you won't be in business for very long. The sixth one is obviously one of the biggest caveats, I think, to everything is, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, will go wrong in your business and life. But the most important thing is about this aspect of trying to be as graceful as you can. And why I think that's important in business is that, someone very famous said, I think a very wise person said that, something like 94% of things that are going to happen in your life are actually out of your control. And then the other 6% or thereabouts that are in your control, if you can fix them, then what's the point of worrying about them? Because obviously you've got a solution for them. And if you can't fix the other 94%, and that's out of your control, then what's the point of worrying about that? So just have no stress. So I think that's really good to just put out there, just to remind you guys as you're on your journey. So most important question to always ask yourself here is, why are you here? And why did you log in today? Or why did you watch this video if it comes back to you, one of the downloads? What are you trying to get out of this and what drew you to the topic? So it's just always very important to just kind of take a step back before we engage, to just kind of think about, okay, we're about to invest about an hour of your time watching this or listening to this. What are the top 3 things that you're trying to get out of maybe learning the 12 styles of entrepreneurship? So just give yourself some thought about that. Hit the pause button if you can and just write something down. I'll give you that chance to do that now. Okay, cool. So hopefully you've written down 1 or 2 or 3 things. If you've done 3, well done. If you've written 1, I don't know, start thinking about a second one. So it's good to kind of go the extra mile. So, okay, so let's get into it. So what are we going to talk about today? I think what we're going to cover are really exciting because number one, which some people have come across if you've worked in corporate life or not, but what is personality profiling? I think this gets thrown around quite a few times, but nobody actually understands when it was started and why and all those sort of things. So we're just going to touch on that very briefly. Second is, what types are there? What types of personalities are there? What type of tests or profiling mechanisms can you use? What's out there? And the first one, obviously, that I was most interested in when I came across this and saw how much of an impact it had towards entrepreneurial success is I wanted to basically try and see if I can group certain styles that I've worked with over the last few years. I think I've coached and facilitated personally over 400 students or candidates or clients, whichever one you want to call it, or entrepreneurs so far. And they all fall into different styles. And I found that around these 12, it's much easier for me to kind of see the style and encourage them to build a business that kind of works along their style or with their flow of their style, rather than trying to suggest a business that may not be as passionate or maybe become too difficult because it doesn't work with their personality style. So I came up with about 12. I think there was 13, 14 variations, but I think 12 kind of symbolizes the distinct one. So we'll cover that. And then which test helps entrepreneurs? I think even though there's a lot of personality profile tests, a lot of them over the years have evolved, because what they do is they're very much channeled towards entrepreneurs or employees, and that's nothing wrong with that. But it's just when it comes to, I think, an entrepreneur, you kind of fall in a different category altogether. And some of these things are not enough to just kind of, come up with some sort of personality types to help you in terms of your role, because at the end of the day, you might be wearing a million hats at the beginning of your business. So what does it mean, and what test is kind of more applicable to us in terms of when you're in an upstart or a startup? And then how can you use that? And then obviously, how do you discover your style, and how can you assess yourself so that you can benchmark yourself with this content, and see whether, I'm kind of closer to being accurate with who you are or not. So I'll be very open to getting feedback on this later, and you can email us obviously about that, and I'll send you some details on the email address. Okay, so let's get into it. So what is a personality test, and why do people kind of do these things, and why is it important? The best information I was able to come up with based on my research was a personality test is a questionnaire. It's a standardization instrument that was actually designed in the 1920s. But what it actually addresses are things like individuals' characters or the psychological makeup. And I think what they mean by psychological makeup is, there's been the big argument over nurture versus nature, and whether, because of where you were brought up, or your parents and your environment can make you a certain way, or maybe because your disposition is biological, you're a woman or a man, and so you have certain tendencies. I think all these things are very, very important. And I think at the end of the day, to ignore them is a little bit ignorant in some ways, because they do affect the way we kind of see the world and interpret the world. And most importantly, why it's important for us in business is that, they're just some default core things that you have, call it, coding, call it environment. Now, can they be changed? Absolutely. I've met people that have maybe one day, and I'll share my personal story maybe later, where my culture and my background being of African descent encouraged us to kind of show respect in certain ways, which meant maybe not being so outspoken. So in my earlier part of my years, my environment, I was probably less outspoken. And then later on, with the opportunities of travel and experiences, I became more outspoken. So a lot of my, I guess, psychological makeup has changed and evolved over the years, but there's still some fundamental parts that haven't changed much, actually. And I might touch on that this talk or another. But the most important thing I'm trying to say there is, I feel, a very big acknowledgement of kind of trying to discover and invest the time in finding out your individual character or psychological makeup, because that will impact you. And for example, things like how you deal with failure. So just some food for thought on that. But the first personality tests, anyway, like I said, were discovered in the 1920s, and they were intended to ease the personal selection, particularly in the armed forces. So you can imagine in the army, you're looking for a particular position or places where people should work and kind of feel maximize, they can maximize potential with. It makes basic sense to kind of go down this path, because, if you're kind of risk adverse or risk prone, maybe putting you on the front line makes more sense. So how do you kind of decipher that as quick as possible so you can allocate people in terms of their performance? But obviously over the years, that kind of has spilled over into careers and jobs and things like that. And in a roundabout way, I think not much has changed, but it's just really good to know where their origins were and how this all kind of evolved. So I don't know if you grew up in the West. I didn't, but same time, some of these books through charities and stuff kind of made their way into Africa. And I remember these books called Mr. Somethings. It was like Mr. Happy, Mr. Grumpy, Mr. This and that, and they were kind of cool books. I think I didn't read all of them, but I found them very, very exciting. But it was also kind of curious for me to start asking myself the question, what types of personalities are there, and how many are there, and is it possible for us to find out every single personality? I think the long and short answer is that I don't think we do know every single variation of a personality, but I think it's kind of safe to assume over the research and the evolutions that there are some specific types of traits that you can kind of identify and maybe kind of group people into. But what I did is I went and did a bit of research further to share with you guys that, most well-known types of personality tests, which I use particularly in businesses and companies to assess staff and, new staff members that are joining an organization. Most popular, obviously, is one of those ones called Myers-Briggs. And Myers-Briggs indicator is an assessment that is actually believed to measure the psychological preferences in how people perceive the world and make decisions. And obviously, what they say is there's about 16 different types of personalities. So this is just kind of a good guide to kind of get you started and kind of understand if you've been working for some big organizations, they sit you down and they do these tests and assessments and they give you some sort of chart or feedback. And I think what's really cool about that is that, with at least just starting with the Myers-Briggs, you can look at whether you're a responsible executor, dedicated person, or insightful, motivated, or expansive analyst, analytic, engaging, mobilized. It's like, what's your personality, and how can they best I guess, group you somewhere. And it wasn't basically to try and put you in a box, but I think the main intention there was just to kind of give you a role, be it whether you're going to be in a frontline leadership role or back end or administrative, to make sure that you're working towards your strengths and in flow, so that obviously we can maximize production. And that's very, very important, I think, and very, very good. But obviously, I think a lot of personalities in some areas, particularly the analytical guys, and you know who you guys are, is nobody wants to ever really be put in a box, because that kind of sounds very definitive and almost excludes you from opportunities of growth. But that's not really what this is about. This is just kind of identifying kind of some guidelines as to where people are. So Mybriggs is one of the most popular ones that I found is being used out there. And like I said, it's a multi-million, if not billion-dollar industry. And a lot of people use these sort of assessment tools to help them group people in terms of psychological and make decision making, I guess, and levels of decision making. But the second one that is also really cool and quite popular as well is, and I came across this one while I was, in my corporate career, is called disc profiling. And this one is an assessment, again, that kind of uses theories of a psychologist called William Moulton. And basically, what they do there is it centers around 4 behavior traits. One of them is dominance, the other one is induciveness, another one is submission and compliance. And naturally, you can imagine, if you're like very dominant and obviously induce, kind of that way inclined, then chances are you might become more of an active type of person. But if you're more compliant and submissive, chances are you fall into being more of a passive person. And then obviously, if you kind of have this analytical type of mind, chances are you might be more task oriented. But if you're more extroverted type, you might be more people focused. So it's a very simplistic way of looking at things. But I think the most important thing about disc profiling there that I found was quite useful is that at the end of the day, you could get people who might be wanting to work in the people oriented business, for example. I think it would make more sense then for you to kind of pick careers or offer services and things that do work with people, because that's your disposition in general. But if you end up being more task oriented and not necessarily people focused, it makes sense for you to kind of maybe go into more apps or development. So these sort of things I think are just really cool guides for you to kind of reflect on and think, okay, well, am I an active person? Am I more laid back? And if I'm more laid back, do I prefer to kind of engage people or be around people, or do I just prefer to be kind of working on some mechanical stuff? So these sort of things I think can really make a difference as you're building a business, because the most important part of any of these profiles is you're going to be investing time in your startup. But what I find is they're also still quite limiting, because they don't quite kind of they're designed in a good way, but at the same time they're very much about assuming that you're going to get into a job that has fixed responsibilities, for example, and therefore it'll slot you into some particular area, whereas in business, it's not quite the case. So how do you actually discover your style? And I find that one of the easiest cues is to just kind of enroll yourself in this process of being a student. And one of the best tellers when I do my talks, so I talk to my clients, is I'm not necessarily always judging people or assessing people from a point of view of, disc profiling or Myers-Briggs per se, but a general overview of a safe way to look at people I found was most effective through this book I read called Personality Plus by Florence Littauer. And what that just does is it actually more leans on emotional responses with people. And if you know the old saying, we're emotional creatures that make emotional buying decisions, I think from a business point of view, it's really good to know that. And to kind of ask yourself, how are you as a person? Are you more introverted, extroverted? Are you more stable or unstable? And not from a sake like, you're psychotic and you're going to jump off a cliff or anything, but just more kind of assessing yourself, like, if you got these emotional attributes that maybe lean you more towards one than the other. And when you start judging yourself in one of these categories, it always helps to kind of be also a bit open-minded and realize that you may have one major dominant attribute, but at the same time, you might have a sub attribute. So I find when I do these personality tests, and if you're interested, I'll be more than happy to send you an email on the test that you can do and then kind of assess yourself. So it saves you reading the whole book. But the minute that you kind of start asking yourself who you are and what sort of profile that you have, like I said, you can see some of these attributes in here. it's very easy then for you to lean on your strengths rather than spend your whole life trying to work on your weaknesses and find that you can't compete in the market when it comes to a startup. So I really recommend the Personality Plus book. It's written more for social and relationship type angle, but I found it's very simple, basic, easy to understand, and you can chart yourself quite easily. And then more importantly, start charting the people you're interacting with. And God forbid your clients fall in an opposite personality to you, can kind of show you how you can bridge that gap so you're not losing out on the connection, which could lead to potential business down the track. So that's why that's important. And the second tool that I've actually come up with that I use with my clients is this thing I call the 39 ultimate questions for every startup founder. And the reason why I think this is important, I mean, I was at some point, I think I had a couple of businesses, built them, they became not so successful. And I started questioning myself as to why some things were happening and why is it sometimes I even made money, really good money actually, and yet I was still very unfulfilled, very unhappy, and very unsettled. So I started asking myself, it would have been so cool if someone took me on the side and just kind of asked me some guideline questions that could kind of help me clarify who I was and what I was trying to do before I even started some of these crazy, ridiculous businesses. But in hindsight, they were great experiences. But I can guarantee you, had I done some of these questionnaires and answered these honest questions, as I talked about earlier about being honest, it might have guided me to avoid some challenges that I may have not needed to invest in a lot of time and effort or hold on to things too long. And this could have clarified more things about where I'm at and what I'm trying to do. So these are just a couple of 5 questions, but I think one why I use this as just a demo to show you is there's 39 questions, and we don't have the time to go into it today. But what I recommend is, at least if you can ask yourself, question number 1 is, why do you want to get into business? Is it for freedom, money, being able to be your own boss, etc.? What is it that motivates that? Because if you can answer that question, at least you can really dig deeper into the intentions of why you're trying to be in business. And I think the more you do that, the more likely you are to kind of clarify what sort of structure you can have. And like I said, there's 39 questions here, but at least if you can answer 5, I think you're getting there closer. So feel free to text us later about that. So let's talk about now the actual 12 startup styles that I discovered that I think most people fit into. And, as I share these 12 styles, just kind of ask yourself the question, which one resonates the most with you, your combination of 1 and 2 or 3. And I'll try my best to explain this, but it's going to come from, obviously, like I said, more my personal experience, seeing people who've engaged in business, what level of risk they were prepared to take and where they were at in business, and kind of where they found it easier to operate from. So see where you fit in, and let's talk about that. So let's talk about number 1. Number 1 is what I call the style of an entrepreneur called the risk taker. These type of entrepreneurs, in my opinion, are probably one of the most important, not because they are better than any other attribute. It's just, if you really think about it, by population, 80% of the world population are not starting up a business and not necessarily looking to take risks. And then a crazy 20% actually go, oh, you know what? Even though the probabilities are pretty low that I'll be successful in business, I'm going to get in for ABC reasons, like we talked about with the questionnaire. So similarly with that, you can imagine that it does take a level of risk to actually undertake a business and, I guess, put your resources into something that may or may not work. And as you know, with Bloomberg statistics, I talk about this. There's like a 90% chance in the first year most businesses won't succeed. So, and they go bankrupt basically. So you can imagine that you need a level of risk. But where I'm trying to go with this is that if you even take that risk, there's some people that just have a higher threshold of risk taking. And that style is very, very important. And I guess what you need to ask yourself is, how much risk do you tend to like to take, and how much are you comfortable with taking? Because there will be a place that you hit that you go, well, this just doesn't make me function. I can't take further risks in this. But you need to assess that and be very, very clear with yourself, because depending on the businesses that you get into, some of them require you to take continuous risks. Others, maybe just in the beginning, and they're home and dry. So the second type of entrepreneur style that I've come across is this style called investor. Now, in my opinion, the difference between an investor and a risk taker, well, not even the difference, but the style of an investor is someone that tends to want to maybe come into a project, service, or venture. They have financial resources in most cases, or they have resources that they use if you like, to invest in other people or other things. So the typical example of these are people like angel investors. Now, angel investors or venture capitalists are not in a lot of cases themselves, um, looking to put in the effort. And I think that's the difference. That they're not necessarily looking to put in the effort, but they're looking to support someone else that may be able to put in there's a sweat equity, as we call it, which is the hard word. But they want to kind of jump on the idea. If they think it's viable, they'll invest in it and they'll drive it and support it in that way. And then they expect someone else to do it. But they really kind of play more of like a backseat role, and probably are more after things like branding, uh, you know, getting sound proposals, because they're not necessarily the risk takers, but they're prepared to kind of risk with their resources, but not necessarily their effort. So the third, though, is kind of like innovators. Now, innovators, in my opinion, are people who are kind of like the trendsetters. They may or may not necessarily be the ones driving the business, because innovation in itself is something that it's kind of like a complicated word, in my opinion, but simply put, they have great ideas, and some of these ideas, and what I think distinguishes an innovator is someone that can maybe think up something. So it comes out from intellectual or dreams or fantasies, or just maybe something that's not being done, and they're motivated, they're inspired to launch something that may be a game changer, trendsetter, or something like that. So it very much comes from a good idea, and at the same time they can be very, very, very visionary. So they can think 5, 10, 20 years in the future. And you might have met a few people like this, pitching you the next best thing that's going to happen, and they'll make predictions about things, for example. But these sort of people, are very rare, because at the end of the day, a lot of us tend to try and look for security by maybe getting into business using an idea that's already been tested, it's been sound. But innovators are totally against that. They want to basically create something that's new and most likely hasn't been done before, and at the same time improve something maybe that can still be innovation. But in most cases, that's what inspires them the most. It's not the mundaneness of sameness or repetitiveness. So that's a point of difference. The fourth one is decision makers. And I think the difference between decision makers and a few other uh, characteristics of entrepreneurs, I guess, or styles, is you find someone who's got a decision making style always wants to make some of these what we call hard decisions. So, for example, shall we invest in this and take on the gamble that it may not work in 5 years? A decision maker is someone who rises to the challenge and make that decision. Or also, there are also type of people that, at the end of the day, I think decision is very much connected to responsibility. So decision makers tend to want to take responsibility for things. A lot of people sometimes want to take, I guess, the credit for something when it goes right. But a decision maker, 9 out of 10 times, would take a decision and is prepared to take the brunt of it, I guess, if things also don't go wrong. So you probably have to ask yourself in a lot of cases how you feel about taking on gambles or risks or big projects that if you make the call on something, it has a consequence where you might not be liked, or you might be even excommunicated from certain groups of people that you're working with. But you don't mind taking that, because like I said, there's no right or wrong about decision making. It's just about the fact that you can execute the decision and stand behind it and hold the weight or the space, if you like, regardless of whether it's the right decision or not. So where do you stand on that, and see if you fit into that? And the next one is obviously, these sort of experts or types of people where, at the end of the day, these inventor types, I think, is the best word for that. It's a little bit different to innovation, in the sense that you're probably, going in, testing something, proving that it works, and at the end of the day, you love the credibility that comes with having the qualification or being recognized as the person that is seen as an expert in the field. So in a lot of cases, a lot of experts also have a lot of strong opinions, but I find I've got also a couple of clients from my experience that would probably say things like, well, I'm an accredited such and such in neurolinguistics, and I got my certification in culture training from such and such and such and such and such and such. These sort of styles need validation. Okay, and this is why I use this picture, because the validation is what also gives them the confidence to feel like, they've invested the time to educate themselves and got a piece of paper to show for it, or in some cases they've got an invention that's been proven, patented, etc., and then they feel ready to take it out to the marketplace. Now, this is also very, very important because depending on the business that you're in, particularly if you're I had a client once that actually came up with a very, very cool invention, which, could power a house, for example. Now, he had a very specific patent for it. He did all these things that he could do it, but he found himself also coming a bit short because he spent so much time in the invention, but never actually questioned whether there was a demand in the marketplace for it. So there's some challenges with validation in the sense that you could get something that's approved or an authority figure has endorsed you, but at the end of the day, in the marketplace, it's about supply and demand. And in a lot of cases, you find that some clients may not want what you've invented or created, or they may not necessarily care if you have an accreditation for a particular area or field, but they're more interested to see if you can solve a problem. So these are just kind of different styles that people have when they get into business. And I find it's just an important thing for you to understand your disposition in that. Is in, do you hold on to credentials and credibility, approved bodies to do certain things before you feel you can get out there and launch your business? And that again connects you to whether you fall into one style or another. Okay, the sixth one is instructor. Now, I think one of the best people I can imagine is, I had a client who owned a very successful gym, for example. And this gym, he took the risks of getting the land, developing the place, etc., etc. But what he also wanted were people who could take his, I think it was like a fitness program, which he was using, and then he basically encouraged personal trainers to come in and teach the classes on this particular style. And what I find with a lot of these people is they may not necessarily be entrepreneur styles that will come up with something new. In most cases, they may or may not necessarily want to come and invent a breakthrough thing that's going to like validate their expertise or something like that. And they may not, want to maybe make a decision on taking the higher risks. But what these people can do is they can synthesize some information, put it together, and then they can bring loads of people together and basically like facilitate something. So these are more like instructor styles because what they do is they motivate people, they maintain the morale of a team, but at the same time they like to work in things that are already existing working, and they love to work with people. So it's just a really important thing for you to know where you fit in with that, because in a lot of cases some instructor type entrepreneurs tend to want to mobilize teams and get the best effectiveness from people, but at the same time they may or may not want to take a lot of the larger risks. So there's nothing wrong or right about it, but it's just a very important thing to consider, because again, if the motivation is to work with teams and help people perform and mobilize people, and let's just say in the beginning of your startup you don't actually have any clients and you don't actually have any staff, it's very hard for you to take on an instructor role because there is no one to instruct. So in those cases, it's just really important to know that there might be some hats missing, and you might need to be working with someone else that might be a risk taker or a decision maker, or someone like that that can execute a far further until you get enough of a team or a client base that you can basically then start using your skills. But that's just something for you to think about, because a lot of people kind of stagnate there because they feel their businesses aren't working, because they feel very isolated. And this is one of the biggest challenges for instructors. All right. And the seventh one is about project management, project manager types. Now, the project manager types are, I think, one of the awesomest types of skills to have, particularly when you're getting into business, because one of the things you soon realize when you're in the startup stage is you start to recognize that you're no longer just the inventor or the person who came up with the idea. You become the timekeeper, you're the accountant, you're the web designer, you're the financier, you're the team support person, you're the customer service, you're pretty much every single role. And some people who don't have project management skills tend to feel a little bit overwhelmed, particularly in the beginning of their business. Does anyone feel that way? So what's just important to realize is that some people actually have this as a natural tendency. They love to have multiple things going on at the same time. And at the same time, they want to make sure everything works to the time frame. So if you have this skill, chances are it's a very, very good chance you probably, get yourself in a position where you can grow your business steadily and sustainably, because you are aware that there's a lot of hats that you need to wear all at the same time, and everything is just as important than others. But at the same time, project managers may or may not necessarily be very good decision makers, because they can get time frames and things organized in a certain way. But what happens if you haven't actually created the idea first off, and you don't know what parts are needed, and you don't know what divisions are existing, you see? So a lot of people here also fall short, but it's really important for you to know that if you do have project management skills, and it can come to your advantage, but it makes sense to maybe get some guidance as well as to what those divisions are that you need to focus on. And from there, I think it can come naturally. Okay, so the other style that I find that I've worked with is some people just are very top level in the sense that they're very brand conscious. And I use the Apples and the Nokias and all these type of brands for many reasons. I think something I talk about and I smile about it a little bit with some of my clients is like, I find people get into their businesses, they really care so much about what it looks like. So they'll spend more time on their website, they'll spend time on their logos, they'll spend time on trying to be like Kmart, or trying to be like Coca-Cola if they're in the juice business, or trying to look like Nike, because Nike have great branding and visuals and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, brand owners are very powerful people, because eventually when you are getting into business, I think it, particularly as an entrepreneur in the startup or upstart stage, it's very important to start doing a lot of things in terms of service delivery, solving people's problems in your product, service, or idea that you may have, and then trying to connect that back to some central theme or logo or something, so that people can start associating with you about that. So branding has intrinsic value, and branding is important. The only challenge I have with branding that I keep reminding startups and upstarts about is that at the beginning of the day, it's not the most important thing. It is very, very important, but it's not the most important thing. What is more important than branding, I think, in a particular stage where you're in non-existence or you're a new idea that people don't know about, is it's one thing to send out an email campaign and for people to jump on your website because it looks pretty. But at the end of the day, you don't have credibility or social proof. Okay, so if you don't have credibility or social proof, and you're thinking about your businesses, or talk to any other small business that's been around, that you find that, in the majority of cases, it makes more sense to invest your time to actually get one client that you can service, make sure they get great feedback to you, you actually solve their problem, and then get the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth. And before you know it, you start hitting this critical mass where you can start having a cohort of people that can be your brand ambassadors, if you like. And that, to me, is kind of one of the better strategies of branding. It's like you actually create brand ambassadors first, who validate you and confirm your services. And then it's easy for them to then share your story by having a brand. But if you kind of focus on the look and the feel of a logo and all these sort of things, if you really think about a lot of these businesses, yes, branding played a very, very central part in how they grew. But let's just use Apple as an example. Some of these brands, like Apple logos, were changed a million times over the course of their period of time. But what they didn't do is they didn't stop innovating. They were known for innovation. They were known for seamlessness. Things like that really make a difference. So just be aware, it's a very important part. And I catch a lot of people, unfortunately, spending too much time in the branding space. But it's a very, very beautiful entrepreneurial style, because image is very important, obviously, to that particular person and how things look. But at the same time, I always challenge you to think about, well, it's one thing to look good, but what's actually under the bonnet? Do you have deliverables, and have you got a caseload of people that can validate you to say, yes, your product actually did this, or your service did this, or your idea is actually making a difference, and I would be more than happy to recommend you to another person. And pay money for that, actually. That's another key point. So number 9 is production employer. Now, these people tend to be, in most cases, analytical. Why? Because they're always measuring things. They're always looking at, where's the quality, where's the speed, where's the results? Are we making money in this? Are we not? How can we reduce the cost? How can we do this? So it's a little penny handling going on in that area. Now, there's nothing wrong with having this as a style to start with. The only challenge I always have with people like this is, at the end of the day, I tell a lot of people that, it takes anything from about well, let's just say theoretically it's 10,000 hours for you to have a excellent skill mastery of a particular area to produce high quality, for example. But if in the beginning you're not too sure about your business, product, service, or idea, you may not know the life cycle of how long it takes to say accumulate a new client, and how long it takes to service a client, and how long before they renew or exit and then refer people, etc., etc. So the dangers of costing yourself and trying to kind of cut costs and cut corners on trying to make sure you don't go out of business too quickly without giving yourself some room to grow, make some mistakes, and kind of make some observations around some of the cycles of how your business naturally is growing. And the perfect example is when I get some clients, say they've been in business for 3 months, making great money along the way, clients growing, and then in the fourth month or the fifth month, things start to dwindle and not produce anything. They start changing the whole model of their business. And I'm usually saying, hey, listen, slow down. You haven't done 12 months of 12. So it's very, very premature to start evaluating your results after 2 days, for example, or that you think you're not doing well and you need to change the color of your logo again, as some branding owners would love to do, because they think that's going to affect the sales when it's got nothing to do with it. What I like to encourage with production employers is always be aware there's things like quality, speed, and results, and costs, obviously. But the most important one also is there's some external factors. Some people just go through a winter month, meaning for example, in the services business or education business, university students, people during Christmas period just probably don't want a lot of personal development. They would rather be home. Now, there's still some that would love to go to a workshop, for example, for personal development. But around Christmas time, most people want to be home. So as a business owner, you can see that the results might be going down in December, but doesn't mean necessarily that there's something wrong with your strategy. So just be aware of your style if you're a production employer type person who leans on statistical analysis and trying to make these conservative decisions, that you have to start allowing some free time and space to produce more results within a calendar year. And then I think that could work really well to your advantage. Okay, so the 10th one I call contractors. Now, this is something that's really, really interesting. I found there's a big movement, as some of you may know, around co-working spaces and people working in these sort of remote areas. But in some cases, a lot of these contractor type entrepreneurs or styles are very risk adverse. What do I mean by that? A lot of times, some of these maybe be freelancers or contractors, but they work, as programmers. They would work as accountants, clergy, secretaries, or bookkeepers, or whatever. And so they can work pretty much from anywhere around the world. And unfortunately or fortunately, they can be classed as entrepreneurs. But at the same time, if you ask, well, how are you making your money? They'll be like, oh, actually, I've got this contract and I'm working for this particular company and they're paying me, so I can pretty much work. Now, that's a very, very good way to be. And I think it's also quite entrepreneurial in its style. But what's very important to realize is some of these, this space of contracting is very much about more selling the skills to produce a particular project on behalf of somebody else. Now, that's a service, of course. But at the same time, if you ask some of these contractor styles, would you be open to building a business and working more than a 4-hour work week? In most cases, some of them would say no. They would work on a project base, get the project finished, and then hunt another client. But they most likely wouldn't run a company in that regard, because it does start to attract a lot of these other styles and risks. So if you're kind of a contractor style, there's really something really, really beautiful. But at the same time, like I said, it's more of a freelancer style. But the risks are very, very less, and you're more like a solo entrepreneur in most cases, want to keep it that way. So it's a really beautiful way to go, and I think you have a lot of freedom. But at the same time, like I said, some of these styles need to question themselves if they're really going to be an entrepreneur. Are they looking to stay as a solo entrepreneur with less responsibilities? But if you do want to grow a company, definitely you'll be putting in a lot more hours than you would think, and taking a lot more risks. So that's just something to be aware of. And then the 11th style that I find are these people called problem solvers. Now, problem solvers, in my opinion, are more like amiable people. They have a very peaceful nature about them. And in most cases, if you ask them, they're probably the type of friend that would step in to be mediators. And these guys can be counselors, psychologists type styles. It doesn't mean that you're not an entrepreneur if you're a psychologist. But what I'm trying to say is more like you pretty much need to have two elements introduced to you, and then you're looking to solution that, rather than necessarily coming in where you create the problem and you create the solution, so to say. So perfect example, like I said, is someone who's like a consultant of some sort comes into a big company. The company already has a problem. Maybe say they're losing a lot of customers. And what this person can do is look at maybe what the business is doing to prevent that, maybe what the employees are doing to prevent it, and then come up with a solution to solve them. So they come in for a period of time. So these problem solvers are very, very good to have. And I think if you think about the definition of business, business is about solving problems. The people that tend to be very, very successful in business are people that can A, identify the problem that needs to be solved, and then B, come up with innovations or inventions or whatever you want to call it, make a decision on solutioning those. And the quicker you can bridge those two gaps, the better it is. But it does necessarily start from identifying how to solve that particular problem. And then the last type of style that I came up with, which I think is one of a unique one and not really spoken about much, is what I call the true startup founder. Now, a startup founder for me is probably one of the best styles I've come across, because a lot of people who I find build their businesses sustainably actually come in to their business ideas, project services ideas, or whatever you want to call it, but they come in with this sort of maternal instinct, meaning they see their idea, their project like a child. And I'll give you an example. I'm a parent, so I really know what this feels like. But there's a big difference between kind of having an interest or a hobby about doing a business. Let's just say you find there's an opportunity to get into the app-based business, or be a freelancer or a middle person, and you want to make a bit of money. This is great. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's also being quite entrepreneurial. But this startup founder actually has the intention to birth something, to nurture that thing, to feed that thing, and then watch it grow to a point where hopefully one day it'll sustain itself and walk its own 2 feet. And the best metaphor I can find in nature or in the world is mothers. A startup founder is like a mother. They will fight for this business. And I think one of my best reminders that I had once upon a time, when I was talking to one of my coaches, I think about 5 years ago, and he was trying to tell me my lack of commitment to my business at the time. And I was pretty upset about it, but he said something. He says, Aaron, the problem you have at this moment is not that you can't sell, you can't make decisions, you're not investing in your business, blah, blah, blah. He says, the problem is you're not treating this like one of your children. And I was like, I don't understand what you mean. And he says, well, what does your child need to survive? I said, well, it needs food, needs nurturing, caring, exactly. Great. He says, what does it eat? Oh, vegetables, etc., etc. I says, great. Okay, let's just imagine your business now is your second child. And I have a son, of course. So he says, this is your second baby. So he says, what does your second baby need to eat? I said, well, it needs a lot of my money. And he says, of course, that's what businesses need, particularly in the infancy part of the business, where there's maybe not a lot of sales coming in. You, as the founder, need to get out there. You need to hustle. You need to sell, pardon my French, the crap out of this business. Because at the end of the day, if the business doesn't keep getting cash flow in from your sales, it's going to starve to death. And I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the minute I decided to become a startup founder and mother my business idea was the minute it became successful. Just in that instant. Why? Because then from that point onwards, I was committed to the process of doing whatever it took to ensure that business stayed sustainable and living. So in a lot of cases, I find a lot of people I coach have a lot of this entrepreneurial zeal and they want to do the business. But where they fall short is they don't actually treat their business like a child. Meaning, sometimes this child needs to eat 24 hours, 7 days a week, and you need to give it the attention it requires. There is no taking time off. And that sounds a little bit extreme, I know, but what I am trying to say is that the entrepreneurial style of people that treat their business like a child, you wouldn't negotiate that. You would pretty much have it at such a focus, and then you'd work your lifestyle around that child, because that's just how babies work. And any parent who is listening to this, or any parent you might want to ask, or maybe if you were a child of someone, who and ask your parents, in the beginning part of your business, in the beginning part of your life, did they have to make a lot of sacrifices and considerations? And the answer is absolutely yes. But imagine now if you had the same mindset about your business. And then here's a beautiful thing. Now you might be, in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. You're stronger, you're more sustainable. And guess what? If you get to a fortunate position like I am, you start looking after your parents. And what an honor that could be. But I feel in business is exactly the same. If you work hard enough for your business, there will be a tipping point where your business can look after you. But to get there, you need to act like a startup founder. And that involves being every other personality there is and not actually using any of those limitations as an excuse, but actually focusing on what it takes to feed your baby. And if you treat it like a baby, you never stop. So I hope that really helps you, but I found that very, very powerful. So let's talk about now, which tests actually help entrepreneurs. We talked about the Myers-Briggs earlier, we talked about the DISC profiling, but most of those are kind of catered towards employees. But what tests can you use as an entrepreneur to kind of figure out where you sit? So here's what I came up with, and I think this is one of the coolest tests. And this one is called the Big Five personality test. Okay. Why Big Five? Because there are five major areas that it kind of assesses, but I'll tell you why I like it more. The reason why I think it's very, very good in comparison to Myers-Briggs and all these others is, number one, it's because it's just simple. But number two, it is more of a scale than it is of a distinctive score. So the five areas that they talk about, number one is openness. Number two is consciousness. Consciousness. Number three is extroversion. Number four is agreeableness. And number five is neuroticism. I think I can't actually spell that, but you can read it for yourself. So the reason why I like this, as I said to you, is I find particularly in entrepreneurship, rather than saying, hey, are you closed-minded or open-minded? It's just about a scale of how far you go. But these five areas are very important in combination. And why I found this really, really helpful, and I'll send you guys a link later as to how you can get yourself tested. But I find that, obviously, I'll give you an example. If you're an innovator, chances are you probably score more towards the high score of openness, which means you're curious, you've got a wide range of interests, and, you're quite independent in your way of thinking. But at the same time, that may be good for you, but it might also mean you might be coming up with too many ideas. So sometimes we might have to work towards going towards the left-hand side of being a bit more practical, conventional, and using a couple of routines for our success. Not saying this is good or bad or indifferent. It's just kind of good for you to know which sides are very good to use for entrepreneurship, but also not so good to use. Now, one of them that I think is very, very interesting, and I read a very big article by Forbes magazine, actually, that also encouraged entrepreneurs to use this, because when they did a big test of people that were entrepreneurs in general in rooms, they actually found that when people go to these big conventions of entrepreneurship and ask certain questions, majority of entrepreneurs, this is by large majority of them, were actually not very agreeable people. Now, most times, as you know, society would tell you that you need to be, empathetic, good-natured, cooperative, and all these sort of things. But let's just put this into context, and this is what I found fascinating. If you are a very cooperative, good-natured person that wants to make sure everybody is diplomatically engaged, let's just call it that, and then you find that now 90% of the world population or 80% of the world population are actually not in business. And so they wouldn't encourage you or support you to get into some risky ventures because it's quite risky. But if you have a more of an agreeable nature, not saying this is wrong or right, but if you have more of an agreeable nature and you want to please those people, can you see that automatically, if you go against them, you're not cooperative, right? So most entrepreneurs, when they did the study, they found that most entrepreneurs tend to be open-minded, but they also tend to be not very agreeable because they're going against status quo, which comes to confirm this thing I was talking about, being a heretic. And they're also quite calm and even-tempered about the things that they find are very, very important to them. So what I'm just trying to tell you there is, like, it's a very, very important thing to just kind of assess yourself on a spectrum rather than thinking everything is absolute. But if you're going to get into entrepreneurship, it's also very, very important for you to start asking yourself, where is it costing you to be too open to the wrong people, for example? Or where is it costing you to kind of be, if you're too impulsive, too disorganized, you don't have a lot of structure going on, or maybe you're just so carefree, you don't care if you make a sale today, you don't care if you make a sale tomorrow, you don't care if you don't improve your services, you're not really open to coaching or things like that. Where is that costing you in your business? And obviously, most importantly, if you're more introverted and reserved as a person, but you are withdrawn and hiding behind your computer, how is the world going to know about your product, service, or idea as effectively as they should? Or should you spend your time also trying to be a little bit more sociable and maybe emotionally expressive about how passionate you are about your business, so that people are attracted or at least compelled to give you attention so they can hear what you have to say? So these are just things for you to think about, because I think they're just so important, particularly around these big five, because as an entrepreneur at the beginning of your business, you don't exist. This is a full stop. So whether you send out an email article or do a blog or this, people may see it, but they want to see credibility. They want to see experiences. So it makes sense to start getting out there, trying new things, and not being, I guess, so, what's the word? So I guess cooperative with things that may not be working, but become more aligned with things that are very, very strong towards helping you become successful. Okay, so also something I wanted to touch on here is, how do you actually discover your style? And this is kind of the fifth one. I put this here just to show you, I'm an open book. I really don't mind. You can judge me if you like. But I did this test, and the website you need to go to is www.outofservice.com. So that's out of service, outofservice.com/big five. Okay. Now, if you can go there, you actually get an opportunity to do this personality test for free. So I did this test, and as you can see, I'm a little bit lopsided on some areas. But something I found quite curious is, I am quite open-minded. Definitely put myself as extroverted, because I can be an extroverted introvert, but that's another story for another time. But what was really, really interesting is I'm actually not very agreeable. And I found that quite shocking until I did some research on it. But like I was trying to say, it's not a right or wrong thing. But you find that a lot of entrepreneurs tend to have this curve, kind of like, a curve in the way that mine is kind of looking. And it's quite coincidental that a lot of things in there is I'm open-minded enough to try some crazy business, but at the same time, I'm also sometimes quite stubborn about giving up on certain ideas. Now, the closest analogy I can give you about this is something one of my very successful coaches said. He says that successful entrepreneurs and most people who tend to be up there in the high achievement bracket make very fast decisions, but they change them very slowly. So the other way of putting that is, you're quite open to trying new things, but at the same time, once you commit to that new thing, you're going to actually be very strong in holding on to it until it actually becomes a success. Now, I really recommend you do the test, and obviously do the test for your own good, find out where you sit, and then ask yourself some of these hard questions as to whether you're open-minded, closed-minded, organized or conscious, introverted versus extroverted, agreeable versus disagreeable, and then calm versus nervous. Because who here has ever met someone that's very, very nervous, pitching an idea, service, or whatever, and they come across in a way that doesn't attract you, and then it creates maybe distrust, right? And you tend to not want to work with them even though you love the product. So you need to kind of assess these things for yourself, and then get into a game of being open to being able to move and grow with these things. So none of this is fixed naturally, but I think it's really good for you to assess yourself. So that's pretty much all I wanted to share about these styles and how you can basically identify yourself. And I really recommend, if you can make the time to do that assessment test for yourself and see where you fit in on the scale. And obviously, if you're a client or you're interested in working with me, it makes sense for you to appreciate that I'll try and encourage you guys to kind of work with your strengths rather than trying to change anything. But at the same time, in terms of your openness and ways of working your business, it really, really helps to keep a growth mindset or an open mindset, so that you can actually experiment with yourself on what works and what doesn't work, rather than being anxious or fearful because you don't have enough money, or you think it's not going to work, so you approach your business that way. It's really, really important that you approach it with an open mind. So what I'd like to do now is just invite you guys, if you're open, because what we're doing now is we've launched this amazing platform where we're running these free live webinars, but we're calling it the Startup University. And basically, in the Startup University, you have an opportunity to join different groups or marketplaces. And one of them that is available to anyone for free is called the Startup Builder Tribe. And what you do there is you get advantages of getting a calendar as to when we do these webinars. If you enjoyed this or it resonated with you, chances are you can log in and you get notifications about that. But you also get to connect with over 200 of our tribers there from all over the world, from all 4 continents around the world. And you can just connect and share ideas and things like that. So it's just an open platform for you to do that. So if you're interested, please send us an email. But what excites me about this new opportunity that we're offering is that a lot of these startup tribers, maybe you want consulting later, or they want to maybe get their business to be incubated and work on it on a 54-hour time frame. So we created Startup University, where we'll be launching, getting angel investors together, getting events where we go for 54 hours straight and building people's ideas, and then getting some seed funding at the end of it. So the people that will be probably nine out of 10 times inviting are people who've been part of our startup tribe. So if you want to join the tribe, you get perks like that, by like free invitations to join some of these things. And if you're interested, please let us know. So generally you get about 12 months access for this. And like I said, it's all free for the live ones. But if you want the downloads, you may need to send us an email and you can download on demand. Okay. But what I wanted to say about that is, like, it's a free platform. You get to connect with over 250 people. I think it's 300 now, actually. But if you want to get some of the downloads of some of the topics that we've done, we've got over 240 hours of content. Feel free to email us. I think it's $404.99 per download. You get to keep it on your computer and replay it, and hopefully some of this has been really, really helpful. So what I want to say from there is just send us an email at operations@lawprofit.com. I really appreciate everyone who's joined in today. Hope it's been useful. And if you need any more information or want to get an assessment test to do an assessment of your style, please feel free to email us also. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll talk very soon. Thank you.